Each supervillain possesses a unique set of traits that define their strengths and weaknesses, such as physical prowess, intelligence, strategic thinking, vulnerabilities, flaws, or even emotional weaknesses. What constitutes a weakness, though, or a strength? Well, that depends on the character and honestly our perception of them. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It is me, Amanda. Join me today as we count down the top 10 weak villains with incredible powers. Which underrated character in comics is your favorite? Number 10, Victor Zsasz. Victor Zsasz is literally just a dude with a knife and a penchant for taking lives. Granted, I'm sure he's pretty strong. I've seen him drawn as such, at least, with at times his muscles being made to look like they have muscles. But then again, he's also been drawn as having a kind of wiry frame as well. In fact, I'd even go so far to say as his wiry frame is more the status quo than his like super jacked version. Zsasz doesn't actually have any powers to speak of, but he does have an obsession for taking lives that often makes him one of the most dangerous foes around. He's relentless, and that's what you need to watch out for. Zsasz won't stop until he gets what he wants, and is also even able to ignore injuries he sustains whilst fighting to claim a life. Basically, he's just like insane. So you don't want to fight him. But also, he's just a dude. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9, Kraven. When you think about it, Kraven is kinda just a guy who's really good at hunting. But that's kind of about it. I mean, he does have some augmentations thanks to a magic potion that he drank, but he's ultimately just a man. In the end, Kraven actually did end up perishing too, so the version of him that we have in the comics now isn't even really the original version of Kraven. He's actually a clone of Kraven who was introduced as basically one of his pseudo-sons. This version of Kraven would end up taking his father's place. I think one of the most powerful abilities or powers that Kraven has is the ability in this way to kind of not die. Even the original Kraven did perish earlier on and was resurrected, and when he passed away more permanently, he lived on with his clone, Kraven 2. The last son of Kraven, which is also like really weird that he had a bunch of clones considering he actually does have sons. I'd be insulted if I was the son. Number 8, Golden Glider. Golden Glider is Lisa Snart, sister to Captain Cold's Leonard Snart and longtime girlfriend of another fellow Rogues member, Mirror Master. Golden Glider is a pretty cool and underrated character, I think. She never wanted superpowers in the Prime Earth continuity version of her story, but you know, she got them anyway. This happened when the Rogues attempted to merge their weapons with their DNA to grant them actual superpowers. Normally they just have weapons. The device they were using exploded and Lisa was caught in the crossfire, leaving her physical body comatose but granting her astral projection powers, which she could use to phase and turn invisible. Number 7, Bullseye. Bullseye isn't necessarily known for his amazing strength or anything like that. For all intents and purposes, he's pretty much just a dude with a reinforced skeleton, thanks to him receiving an adamantium upgrade back in the day. At least that used to be the canon explanation for how he became so durable. However, he is probably one of the most skilled marksmen in the world. In fact, I'd even argue that he's a better marksman than Hawkeye is. Bullseye is the villain primarily of Daredevil, but he's also fought against other heroes before, and honestly, every time he fights a hero, for the most part, he seems to fare pretty well. And even when he fights other villains too, I'd say. This is the man who was made famous for taking Elektra away from Matt Murdock and brutally defeating her. And I mean brutally. This is especially impressive when you consider how deadly Elektra alone is. The fact that he was able to take her out is honestly pretty astonishing. Number 6, Mirror Master. For a Flash villain, Mirror Master is not necessarily fast on his feet, but he does have speed in another sense. Mirror Master brings with him his mirror gun and mirror technology. This tech allows him to travel to alternate dimensions and teleport. Teleportation is kind of like super speed, but holds back any of the excuses needed to protect you or whoever you happen to be saving or running with from burning up, which is something you have to have when you're a speedster. You gotta have those excuses, otherwise it's not gonna be pretty when you're running with people. Mirror Master for this reason might not be winning any foot races against any of the heroes, the Flashes, but as long as he's got his mirrors, he can definitely still beat them to the finish line, and even beat them to the finish line across multiversal realities. So just because his powers, if we're talking Prime Earth, or abilities, if we're talking New Earth, are tied to mirrors, doesn't mean that you should underestimate him. Number 5, Arcade. Who is Arcade, and what makes him so seemingly great and dangerous? And does he own an arcade? No, not really. But what does make him great and dangerous is probably his creativity and his genius intellect. Arcade doesn't have any powers of his own, but instead crafts death traps in a place that he calls Murder World, typically a place that he builds with his own resources and his own manipulations. He does this by holding hostage people that his employees, or his victims, who are kind of one and the same sometimes to be honest, care the most about in order to make them play his games, or help him run the games, if they're working for him. And while he might seem ridiculous and look kind of atypical for what you'd imagine a master villain to look like, especially a terrifying one, that bow tie though, he ultimately is very good at putting people in terrifying positions that will even make you, as the reader, squirm at times reading about them. I know I do sometimes when I'm reading Arcade. Oh. He's kind of creepy. Number 4, Killer Moth. Killer Moth never comes out on top, which is why a lot of people consider him to be a weaker villain in the DC canon. But at the same time, he should actually be capable of so much more, which is why I included him here on this list. And there have been a few times that he's proven that he could do more. Killer Moth shares similarities with the esteemed and accomplished hero Batman. Both are fans of using gadgets to enhance their fighting prowess and make up for areas where they otherwise might lack, due to basically neither of them having superpowers. The problem with Killer Moth is simply that he doesn't understand how to best utilize his gadgets and equipment, which is why he is usually very quickly defeated as opposed to becoming a serious threat. Number 3, Weasel. Weasel is Jack Hammer, once the ally of Deadpool turned villain against him. His abilities had more to do with getting weapons and getting them into the hands of certain people who needed them. He was basically a glorified arms dealer when we first got to know him, helping to outfit Wade. Eventually, Weasel saw the people he was allied with as his enemies and decided to turn on them, becoming known later as Patient Zero, an alias he took up. He was a pretty ruthless villain, but at the same time, he isn't actually known for having any specifically inherent powers. Even when he was powered, I would say that was not really what made him so dangerous. What makes him so dangerous is his ability to manipulate situations and, with his genius intellect, turn people against one another. Despite the fact that Deadpool did his best to save Weasel before he ended up perishing when the Assassin's Guild was looking for him, Weasel still blames Deadpool for everything that had gone wrong in his life, including his recent death and his return to hell. It was then that Weasel was able to make a deal with Mephisto that if he could get Deadpool to be his personal assassin, that he would be able to return to life. Being as wily as Weasel is, he was able to negotiate this into happening, which makes him a pretty dangerous villain for someone who doesn't actually have any superpowers currently to speak of. Number 2, Punchline. Punchline isn't super weak, but she is super new, having only been around for a few years in the comics, and so because of this, many people see her as a weaker villain, being a new kid on the block. You know, she hasn't really earned her stripes yet. But at the same time, she shows great potential. One of the things that I think is so impressive about her is how straight up ruthless she seems, preferring to prioritize her own bigger picture over anyone else that she might be working with or working for. That, and she's already shown great aptitude for chemistry and poison/toxin making. Number 1, Bob. Weirdly, but also I guess kinda unweirdly, Bob, who is the initial reluctant ally of Deadpool, ends up also becoming one of his villains. Not his greatest villain or anything, and not a big villain that we all talk about, but definitely, I would say at one point, one of his villains. But while Bob has a long list of weaknesses, he also used to work for Hydra, so he may have some knowledge of Hydra that could be useful. And while his plans don't usually go to plan, he does have some pretty decent ones. Enter his plan to send an alternate version of Deadpool, known as Hulkpool, back in time to kill Deadpool. I mean, he sent him to the wrong timeline, but still, that's a pretty cool plan. And the fact that he had access to a time platform to enact this plan was pretty impressive, honestly, especially for Bob. Granted, this plan did not work, so he still remains probably the weakest villain on this list, hence why I'm putting him at our top spot, but also still has the potential at least to be an epic villain at some point in the future. I certainly would love to see it. I don't think anyone would be expecting it if Bob was master villain all of a sudden. That's about it. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.